The morning sun cast long shadows across the rocky terrain of the Afghan mountains as Staff Sergeant Jake adjusted his scope one final time. Perched on a ridge nearly 800 meters above the valley floor, he had been watching the small village below for 3 hours. His suit blended perfectly with the brown and gray rocks around him, making him virtually invisible to anyone looking up from the valley. Jake had been a sniper for 6 years, but today felt different. Intelligence reports suggested high-value targets were moving through this area, and a SEAL team was already positioned in the village conducting reconnaissance. Through his radio, he could hear the steady chatter of Team Leader Chief Petty Officer Tank coordinating with his 5-man squad. The village looked peaceful enough from Jake's vantage point. Women carried water jugs along dusty paths while children played between mud brick houses. A few elderly men sat in the shade, drinking tea and talking quietly. But Jake's trained eye noticed details that others might miss. There were too few young men around, and those he could see kept glancing nervously at certain buildings. Down in the village, Tank crouched behind a low stone wall with his team. Petty Officer First Class Tommy Razor monitored communications while Hospital Corpsman Second Class David Doc Williams checked his medical supplies. Petty Officer Second Class Santos kept watch on their 6 o'clock, and Petty Officer Third Class Boom prepared his demolition charges just in case they needed to create an exit. Tank spoke quietly into his radio microphone. "Overwatch, this is ground team. We're in position at grid reference 314-528. Village appears calm, but something feels off. Request you keep eyes on the eastern approach." Jake's voice crackled back through their earpieces. "Copy that, ground team. I have good visibility on all approaches. Eastern road is clear for now, but I'm seeing dust clouds about 2 clicks out. Possible vehicle movement heading your way." The SEAL team had been inserted before dawn via helicopter, landing 3 kilometers away and moving on foot to avoid detection. Their mission was to gather intelligence on a suspected weapons cache and identify key insurgent leaders reportedly meeting in the village today. What they didn't know was that their insertion had been spotted by local Taliban spotters who immediately began coordinating a trap. Jake watched through his scope as a small convoy of 3 vehicles appeared on the eastern road. 2 pickup trucks and what looked like a modified sedan, all moving slowly and deliberately toward the village. He counted at least 8 armed men visible in the truck beds, with probably more inside the vehicles. "Ground team, Overwatch. I have eyes on 3 vehicles approaching from the east. Estimate 12 to 15 military-age males, armed with AK-47s and what appears to be an RPG. Time to target approximately 4 minutes." Tank cursed under his breath. They were in the middle of the village with limited cover and multiple escape routes, but all of them would expose his team to enemy fire. The original plan had been to observe and extract quietly, but that option was rapidly disappearing. "Roger that, Overwatch. Can you identify the target building we're supposed to watch?" Jake adjusted his scope and scanned the village again. According to their briefing, they were looking for a compound with a blue door and satellite dish. He found it quickly, a 2-story building near the center of the village, exactly where intelligence had indicated. "Affirmative, I have eyes on the target building. Blue door, satellite dish on the roof. I can see movement inside through the windows. Looks like your high-value targets are definitely in there." But as Jake continued his surveillance, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. More dust clouds were appearing from multiple directions. North, south, and west, the village was being surrounded. This wasn't a coincidental patrol, it was a coordinated ambush. "Ground team, we have a problem. Multiple vehicles approaching from all directions. This is looking like a deliberate trap. You need to extract now." Tank looked around at his team's position. They were in the village marketplace, using vendor stalls and low walls for concealment, but they were completely exposed if enemy fighters got into the surrounding buildings. The nearest good cover was a small mosque about 50 meters away, but reaching it would mean crossing open ground. "Overwatch, what's your count on total enemy forces?" Jake quickly surveyed all the approaching threats. "I'm seeing at least 4 vehicles from the north with approximately 16 fighters, 3 from the east with 15, 2 from the south with 8 to 10, and what looks like a single technical from the west with a mounted machine gun and crew of 4. Total estimate 40 to 50 enemy combatants, and they're positioning to surround the village." The situation was rapidly becoming a nightmare scenario. The SEAL team was outnumbered nearly 10-1, trapped in the middle of a village with minimal cover, and enemy forces were systematically cutting off all escape routes. Standard operating procedure would be to call for immediate extraction, but the nearest friendly forces were over an hour away. Doc Williams checked his ammunition and looked grimly at Tank. "Chief, we've got maybe 20 minutes of sustained fire between all of us before we start running low on ammo. If they coordinate their attack properly, we're not going to be able to hold them off long enough for extraction." Tank weighed their options quickly. They could try to fight their way to the mosque and hold out there, attempt to reach the target building and use it as a fortress, or try to break through the weakest point in the enemy cordon and escape into the mountains. None of the options looked particularly promising. "Razor, get on the horn and request immediate close air support and extraction. Tell them we have approximately 50 enemy fighters moving to surround our position, and we need help now." Started working his radio while Jake continued providing updates from his overwatch position. The sniper was in a unique position. He was outside the enemy cordon and had perfect visibility of the developing situation, but he was also too far away to provide effective supporting fire with his standard sniper rifle against multiple targets. As the enemy vehicles reached the village outskirts, armed fighters began dismounting and moving into positions among the buildings. Jake watched with growing alarm as they demonstrated clear military training and coordination. These weren't local farmers with rifles. They were experienced fighters who knew exactly what they were doing. "Ground team, enemy fighters are taking positions in buildings around the village perimeter. They're moving with military precision and coordination. This was definitely pre-planned. You're looking at a sophisticated ambush by experienced personnel." The first shots rang out just as finished calling for air support. Enemy fighters in a building to the north opened fire on the marketplace, forcing the SEAL team to dive for better cover behind concrete vendor stalls. The distinctive crack of AK-47 rounds filled the air, followed immediately by the team's return fire. Tank grabbed his radio while bullets chipped concrete around his position. "Overwatch, we are taking effective fire from the north. Can you identify firing positions?" Jake was already scanning through his scope, identifying muzzle flashes and movement in the buildings around the village. "I count at least 6 firing positions in the northern buildings, 4 in the east, and more setting up in the south and west. They have overlapping fields of fire covering all your potential escape routes." Santos popped up from behind cover and fired several controlled bursts at a window where he'd seen muzzle flashes. "Got movement in that blue building, second floor window." His accurate fire forced the enemy fighter to duck back inside, but more rifles opened up from other positions. The sound of gunfire echoed off the mountains as the battle intensified. Used his M4 to suppress enemy positions, while Doc Williams worked to identify the best route to better cover. The marketplace offered some concealment, but the concrete stalls wouldn't stop rifle rounds indefinitely. "Chief, we need to move," Doc shouted over the gunfire. "They're getting good angles on us from multiple directions. If we stay here much longer, they're going to flank us." Jake watched the tactical situation develop with growing concern. From his elevated position, he could see enemy fighters maneuvering through the village streets, using buildings and walls to advance closer to the SEAL team's position. The enemy commander clearly knew what he was doing and was methodically tightening the noose. But then Jake noticed something that might give them a chance. The enemy fighters were so focused on surrounding and attacking the SEAL team that they had forgotten about the possibility of Overwatch support from the surrounding mountains. They were moving in the open between buildings, confident that they had all the Americans trapped in the village. "Ground team, stand by. I may have an idea, but you need to keep their heads down for about 30 seconds while I reposition." Jake quickly analyzed the tactical situation from his mountain perch. The enemy fighters had made a critical mistake in their overconfidence. While they had successfully trapped the SEAL team in the village marketplace, they were now moving between buildings without considering the threat from above. More importantly, Jake realized that his current position gave him clear shots at key enemy positions, but only if he could engage multiple targets rapidly. Moving carefully to avoid detection, Jake repositioned himself about 20 meters along the ridge to a spot where fallen rocks created a natural shooting rest. From this new position, he had clear lines of sight to the northern buildings where the heaviest enemy fire was coming from, and he could also see the enemy fighters moving through the streets below. Tank's voice crackled through the radio with obvious strain. Overwatch, whatever you're planning, do it fast. They're moving to flank us from both sides, and we can't cover all these angles much longer. Jake settled into his new firing position and began identifying priority targets. Enemy fighters were positioned in windows and doorways of buildings surrounding the marketplace, but several were also moving through the streets trying to get closer to the SEAL team's position. The sniper knew he couldn't eliminate all the threats, but if he could take out the right targets quickly, he might be able to disrupt their coordination long enough for the team to reposition. Ground team, when I start firing, you have maybe 15 seconds of confusion to move to better cover. I recommend the mosque to your southwest. It has thick walls and limited approaches. Move fast when I give the word. Jake chambered around and acquired his first target, an enemy fighter with what appeared to be a radio who was coordinating movement from a second-floor window. At this range, with no wind to speak of, it would be a straightforward shot. He controlled his breathing, found his natural respiratory pause, and squeezed the trigger. The .308 round covered the distance in less than a second, and the enemy commander dropped immediately. Before the sound of the shot even reached the village, Jake had already shifted to his second target, a fighter with an RPG who was setting up to engage the SEAL team's position. Another controlled shot, another target eliminated. The effect on the enemy fighters was immediate and dramatic. The distinctive crack of a sniper rifle echoing off the mountains caused several of them to dive for cover, unsure where the shots were coming from. More importantly, the loss of their coordinator disrupted their carefully planned assault. "Move now," Jake transmitted as he continued engaging targets. Tank didn't hesitate. "Let's go. Razor Doc bound to that wall. Santos, cover them." The team moved with practiced efficiency, using fire and movement techniques to cross the dangerous open ground between the marketplace and the mosque. Jake continued his deadly work from the ridge. His third shot took down an enemy fighter who was trying to engage the moving SEALs from a rooftop position. His fourth eliminated a machine gunner who had been setting up to cover one of the team's potential escape routes. Each shot was carefully aimed and precisely executed, creating maximum disruption among the enemy forces. But the enemy fighters were experienced and adaptive. After the initial shock of the sniper fire, they began taking better cover and trying to identify Jake's position on the mountain. Several fighters with rifles started scanning looking for muzzle flashes or movement. And Williams reached the mosque wall successfully and immediately began returning fire to cover Santos and's movement. The ancient stone structure provided significantly better protection than the marketplace stalls, and its position gave them better fields of fire against the enemy positions. "Overwatch, we're at the mosque. Can you see how many fighters are still mobile?" Tank asked while reloading his rifle. Jake quickly surveyed the village through his scope. His precise shooting had eliminated 4 key targets, but there were still dozens of enemy fighters positioned throughout the buildings. However, their coordinated assault had been disrupted, and many were now focused on trying to locate and eliminate the sniper threat rather than pressing their attack on the SEAL team. I count approximately 35 to 40 fighters still in action, but they're disorganized now. About half are trying to find my position instead of focusing on you. The northern buildings still have active shooters, and there's movement in the eastern compound that looks like they're trying to set up a mortar. The mention of a mortar got Tank's immediate attention. Mortars could reach both the SEAL team's position and potentially Jake's location on the ridge. If the enemy got indirect fire capability working, it would change the entire tactical situation. "Can you identify the mortar position?" Jake swept his scope across the eastern buildings until he spotted movement in a courtyard behind one of the larger compounds. 2 fighters were assembling what looked like a small mortar tube, while a third was preparing ammunition. "Affirmative. Eastern compound, large courtyard behind the main building. 3 personnel setting up what appears to be an 82 mortar. Range to target approximately 600 meters. It was a difficult shot at that distance, especially with multiple moving targets, but Jake knew he had to disrupt the mortar team before they could begin firing. He adjusted his scope for the increased range and wind conditions, then began calculating the lead required for his moving targets. Meanwhile, the SEAL team was dealing with renewed pressure from enemy fighters who had reorganized after the initial disruption. Automatic weapons fire was coming from multiple directions. and Tank realized they needed to either find a way to break contact completely or eliminate more enemy positions to even the odds. "Doc, how's our ammunition situation?" Williams quickly checked his magazines. "I've got maybe 8 magazines left. Others are probably similar. We can sustain this rate of fire for another 10 to 15 minutes, but after that we're going to need to be more selective with our shots." Had been quiet during the movement to the mosque, but now he spoke up with an idea. "Chief, what if we could get into that target building we were supposed to observe? It's only about 100 meters from here, and it might have better defensive positions. Plus, if our high-value targets are still in there, we might be able to complete the mission." Tank considered the suggestion while bullets impacted the stone wall near his head. The target building was indeed closer, and its 2-story construction would give them better visibility of enemy positions. But reaching it would require crossing another stretch of open ground under enemy fire. Jake's voice interrupted their planning. "Ground team, I'm engaging the mortar position now. After I shoot, they're going to intensify their efforts to find me, which might give you an opportunity to move again." The sniper had managed to get a clear shot at one of the mortar crew members who was standing relatively still while adjusting the tube's elevation. Jake's 5th shot of the engagement struck the fighter's center mass, causing him to collapse onto the mortar tube and disrupting the entire setup. The effect was immediate. Enemy fighters throughout the village began scanning the mountains with renewed intensity, and several opened fire at suspected sniper positions along the. While most of their shots were wildly inaccurate, the volume of fire forced Jake to keep his head down and limited his ability to continue providing overwatch. "Now's your chance," Jake transmitted. "Heavy fire on the ridge, most of them are looking up here instead of watching you." Tank made the decision quickly. "We're moving to the target building. Same drill, Razor and Doc first, then Santos, and I'll bring up the rear. Move." The second movement under fire was more dangerous than the first. Enemy fighters in the surrounding buildings were still alert and dangerous, but many were indeed distracted by trying to locate the sniper. The SEAL team used every piece of available cover, walls, abandoned vehicles, even large stones, to mask their movement across the village. Halfway to the target building, Santos spotted an enemy fighter positioning himself to ambush their route. The petty officer's quick reflexes and accurate shooting eliminated the threat before it could engage the team, but the muzzle flash revealed their movement to other enemy positions. "Contact left," Santos shouted as automatic weapons fire erupted from a building to their north. The distinctive sound of multiple AK-47s firing on full automatic filled the air, and the team was forced to take cover behind a low stone wall just 50 meters from their objective. This was the moment that would define the entire engagement. Pinned down by accurate enemy fire, low on ammunition, and still surrounded by superior numbers, the SEAL team faced a critical decision. They could try to fight their way to the target building, attempt to hold their current position until extraction arrived, or try to break contact and escape into the mountains. But Jake, watching the desperate situation unfold from his ridge position 800 meters away, was about to demonstrate why experienced snipers are force multipliers far beyond their individual capabilities. As enemy fighters moved to exploit what they thought was a decisive advantage, the lone sniper began to systematically turn the tide of battle through precision, timing, and sheer determination. The situation had reached a critical point. Tank pressed himself against the stone wall as bullets cracked overhead, realizing that his team was running out of options. The enemy fighters had them pinned down with crossfire from multiple positions, and their ammunition was dwindling rapidly. In approximately 10 minutes, they would be reduced to pistols and whatever explosives could improvise. From his overwatch position, Jake could see the full scope of the tactical problem. The SEAL team was caught in a kill zone with enemy fighters moving to surround their position completely. But Jake also noticed something that the enemy commander had missed in his eagerness to finish off the Americans. The fighters were becoming overconfident and exposing themselves as they moved in for what they thought would be the final assault. Jake had been conserving his ammunition, but now he realized this was the moment to expend everything he had to save his fellow warriors. He had 18 rounds remaining in his magazine, plus 2 additional magazines. 54 total rounds to change the course of a battle against 40 enemy fighters. "Ground team, I'm going to start systematic elimination of their key positions. When I do, Some of them are going to panic and either run or make mistakes. Be ready to exploit any confusion and get to that target building. Tank acknowledged while reloading his last full magazine. Roger that, Overwatch. We're ready to move on your signal. Jake began what would later be called one of the most remarkable displays of precision shooting under combat conditions ever recorded. He had identified the enemy's command structure and key weapons positions, and now he methodically began eliminating them in order of priority. His first target was an enemy leader who was directing fighters from a doorway in the northern building. One shot, center mass, and the man dropped immediately. The fighters he had been commanding looked around in confusion as their orders stopped coming. Before the sound of the first shot faded, Jake had already shifted to his second priority target, a machine gunner who was setting up to provide covering fire for advancing enemy fighters. The .308 round struck the gunner in the chest, and he fell backward, taking his weapon out of action. Jake's third shot eliminated an enemy sniper who had been trying to get a shot at the SEAL team from a second-story window. The fourth took down another leader who was coordinating movement between buildings using hand signals. The effect on enemy morale was devastating. Within 30 seconds, Jake had eliminated 4 key personnel, disrupting command and control throughout their formation. Enemy fighters began looking over their shoulders instead of focusing on the trapped SEAL team, and several abandoned their positions to seek better cover. "Move now," Jake transmitted as he continued his deadly work. Tank didn't hesitate. "Go, go, go!" The SEAL team bounded from cover, with Razor and Doc providing suppressing fire while Santos and rushed toward the target building's blue door. Jake's fifth shot caught an enemy fighter who was trying to engage the moving team from a rooftop. His sixth eliminated another fighter who was running between buildings, apparently trying to coordinate a flanking maneuver. Each shot was precisely aimed and devastating in its effect, not just physically but psychologically. Santos reached the target building first and immediately checked the blue door. "It's locked, but I can breach it," he reported. "Do it," Tank ordered while providing covering fire. A short burst from Santos's rifle shattered the lock, and the team flowed into the building with practiced efficiency. The first floor appeared empty, but they could hear movement upstairs where the high-value targets were reportedly meeting. Jake continued his overwatch, now focusing on preventing enemy fighters from approaching the building. His seventh shot stopped a fighter with an RPG who was trying to get close enough to blast the building's walls. His eighth eliminated another fighter who was attempting to set up a machine gun position with clear fields of fire on the building's entrances. Inside the target building, the SEAL team found exactly what they had come looking for. 3 high-ranking Taliban commanders were in a second-floor room, along with detailed maps, communications equipment, and documents outlining planned operations against coalition forces. But before they could properly secure the intelligence, they had to deal with the ongoing battle outside. Overwatch, we're in the target building and have secured 3 high-value targets plus significant intelligence materials. Can you keep the enemy off us long enough to complete our search and call for extraction? Jake looked at his ammunition count. He had used 8 rounds and had 46 remaining, but the enemy fighters were adapting to his presence. Several were now taking much better cover, and others were beginning to systematically search for his position. "I can keep them busy, but they're starting to get smart about cover and concealment. You've got maybe 10 to 15 minutes before they either locate me or coordinate a serious assault on your building." Tank made rapid decisions. "Doc, secure the prisoners. Razor, grab those documents and the radio equipment. Santos, set up security on the stairs. Prepare demo charges. If we can't hold this position, we're going to deny it to the enemy." Jake continued engaging targets of opportunity, but he had to be more selective now. Enemy fighters were moving more carefully, using better cover, and several had stopped trying to assault the building in favor of surrounding it and waiting for reinforcements. His 9th shot eliminated a spotter who was trying to direct other fighters to Jake's position on the ridge. His 10th stopped an enemy fighter who was attempting to approach the building from its blind side. But Jake could see that the tactical situation was slowly turning against them again. Then Jake heard something that changed everything, the distant sound of helicopter rotors echoing off the mountains. Close air support was finally arriving, but the aircraft would need someone to identify targets and coordinate their attacks. Ground team, I have rotary wing aircraft approaching from the southeast. Sounds like at least 2 birds. Can you establish communications with them? Was already working his radio. Overwatch, this is ground team. We have contact with Apache flight, call sign Hammer 21. They're requesting immediate target identification and friendly positions. Jake quickly surveyed the battlefield through his scope, identifying the most dangerous enemy positions that needed immediate attention. Tell them friendly forces are in the 2-story building with blue door, center of village. Priority targets are enemy fighters in the northern buildings, grid 314-529, and a heavy weapons position in the eastern compound, grid 315-528. The arrival of the Apache helicopters completely changed the dynamic of the battle. The enemy fighters, who had been confident in their superior numbers and positions, suddenly found themselves exposed to 13 cannon fire and Hellfire missiles from above. Jake watched with professional satisfaction as the lead Apache made its first gun run on the northern buildings. The devastating firepower of the helicopter's cannon system eliminated multiple enemy positions in seconds, causing surviving fighters to abandon their carefully prepared ambush sites and flee toward the mountains. But Jake's job wasn't finished. Even with air support overhead, enemy fighters were still trying to escape with valuable intelligence, and some were attempting to destroy evidence in other buildings throughout the village. Hammer 21, this is Overwatch. I have eyes on approximately 6 to 8 enemy personnel evacuating materials from the eastern compound. They appear to be destroying documents and equipment. The Apache pilot's response was immediate and professional. Roger, Overwatch. Can you mark targets with laser designation or smoke? Jake didn't have a laser designator, but he had something just as effective, his rifle and his skill. Negative on laser designation, but I can mark targets with precision fire. Watch for my muzzle flash and engage personnel in that immediate area. Jake's 11th shot struck one of the fleeing enemy fighters, clearly marking the location for the Apache's follow-up attack. The helicopter's cannon fire eliminated the remaining personnel and destroyed the materials they had been attempting to remove. As the battle wound down, Jake maintained Overwatch while the SEAL team completed their intelligence gathering and prepared for extraction. The combination of precise sniper fire and overwhelming air support had completely routed the enemy force, transforming what had been a potential disaster into a significant intelligence victory. Tank's voice came through the radio with obvious relief and gratitude. Overwatch, ground team. We have secured 3 high-value prisoners and approximately 40 pounds of documents and electronic intelligence. Extraction helicopter is inbound in 15 minutes. Outstanding work up there. You saved our lives. Jake remained focused on his mission until the very end, continuing to scan for threats while the extraction helicopter landed and the SEAL team loaded their prisoners and captured intelligence. Only when the helicopter was safely away from the village did he begin his own movement back to the extraction point 3 kilometers away. Later, during the debriefing at the forward operating base, the full scope of Jake's contribution to the mission became clear. His 11 precision shots had eliminated key enemy leaders and weapons positions at critical moments, disrupted a coordinated ambush by superior forces, and provided the tactical breathing space necessary for the SEAL team to complete their mission successfully. The intelligence gathered from the target building led directly to the disruption of 3 planned attacks against coalition forces and the capture of 7 additional high-value targets in follow-up operations. The 3 prisoners taken during the mission provided information that saved countless lives in subsequent operations. Tank shook Jake's hand after the debriefing. That was some of the finest shooting I've ever seen under combat conditions. When we called contact left and thought we were finished, you took control of that entire fight from 800 meters away. We owe you our lives. Jake's response was typically understated. Just doing my job, Chief. You guys did the hard work down in that village. I just provided a little precision fire support when you needed it. But everyone who participated in the operation knew the truth. When a small SEAL team found themselves outnumbered 10 to 1 and trapped in a carefully planned ambush, it was the skill, courage, and determination of a single sniper on a distant ridge who had turned the tide of battle and saved their lives. It was a textbook example of how one individual with the right training, equipment, and mindset could become a decisive force multiplier in the most desperate tactical situations.